range of things, lighting. Burgess Park gets mentioned in that connection probably more than other parks in Borough. There's a whole range of issues. Homelessness, rough sleeping gets mentioned as contributing to that. Phone snatchers, other things, concerns about those things in parks at night. The Borg work, which was the way we kind of started this evening's meeting, it also hasn't specifically focused on play spaces, but it has focused on parks and the public realm. Just the last thing I'd say in terms of data and insight on play areas is that looking back at the data in terms of formal ASB reports to the council, there have only been 2 in the last 12 months that mention play areas, so it's not a consistent theme that comes out of the reporting. But what we do know is that things like ASB are very underreported, and all the research supports that something over 50% of ASBs get reported, which is why we're doing a lot more work to raise awareness. Having said all of that, public spaces, including parks, are a key focus of our strategy to tackle things like violence against women and girls, recognise the importance of these environments in shaping people's perceptions of safety. We've taken a very proactive approach to that, so targeted action in Borg hotspots. We have 5 priority hotspots that we're working around, doing a number of things. So in terms of public spaces and parks, clearing pedestrian entrances and lifting tree canopies, reducing density in wooded areas and installing signage, reviewing and upgrading lighting where that's necessary, visible displays of crime prevention and Borg awareness materials through places like parks, hosting public engagement events, and I hope some of you noticed some of these awareness stores doing things like distributing personal safety alarms, work borough-wide to strengthen community safety, things like our network of safe havens, with 31 safe havens now across the borough, offering places where people who feel unsafe can go for support, and things like Borg Action Days. We've now distributed over 400 personal safety alarms and things like anti-spiking kits to licensed premises. We've held events in places like Burgess Park, and we also have a programme of self-defence training, and there's now been 15 sessions delivered to about 200 women and girls, including the sessions at the venue adjacent to Burgess Park. Lots of activity to both raise awareness of Borg and to provide people with means of accessing support. We do all of that working very closely with partners, so police and others, and some of the things I talked about earlier, VCS and others. We do joint engagement. We share data and intelligence to drive some of that action. We've done environmental visual audits in each of those priority areas, and that's involved the likes of police designing out crime officers, giving us their expertise, and taking actions on things like vegetation management, lighting upgrades, signage enhancements, etc., etc. That's ongoing work that we continue to do, we continue to monitor, we continue to learn from and adapt as we move forward. So a very integrated approach to dealing with that. The last thing I'd say on all of this, because this does very often get asked, is about things like play spaces and provisions like that have an impact on how people get involved in ASB. And what I'm not aware of is specific research that makes that connection on play specifically. I may be wrong about that, But there is lots of research out there that demonstrates how things like youth clubs, sports, etc., have an impact on preventing crime in ASB. And of course, some of this is rocket science. Things like play help children to build positive skills, to build social networks, and they're clearly protective factors in terms of people's likelihood of getting involved in things like crime and social behaviour. So you listen to my voice enough, I will stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Um, I think it's important that we recognise the reason and the purpose for the review was really to focus on community protection, and it was based on the resident insight surveys. So Stephen kindly touched upon the amount of data that was involved in that process in terms of Southwark 2030 consultations, resident insight. So one of the things that would stand out to me quite strikingly is that the independent review didn't actually engage with residents. So that piece of work is ongoing and looking at how we can achieve that. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the investment that the council has continued to make. So since 2022, we've seen 2 million invested in our community warden service, which has led to 7 additional wardens. And this is fundamentally important. What we've seen is the transformation in the way that they deliver the service, which was previously a visible reassurance presence, which has now transitioned into enforcement activity. And we can see some of the impact on that in terms of the number of community protection warnings and community protection notices that have been served. And this is about taking physical action in the areas the residents have told us there are concerns. Further to that, you can see that this year we've also done our public space protection consultation, which is fundamental. They've lapsed across the borough. So in order for them to come into place, we need to ensure that enforcement activity is taking place and that we're listening to residents in those key hotspot areas. So those area action plans that you saw speak to areas where there is high incidence of street drinking, there are problems in regards to antisocial behaviour, and that's not to say that there aren't other places across the borough that this activity is taking place, but that's to say that the spillovers are concentrated in those areas. One of the things that we've done in response to the resident insight survey, specifically around nighttime safety. So you've heard this conversation before, which was, the London average for nighttime safety is much higher than it was in Southwark. So to be innovative and go into that test and learn space, we've launched a nighttime uniform patrol service, which was launched in August. And what we're doing is analysing the data to see whether people's perception of safety changes as a result of the visible presence. So there's lots of promotion around that service. You can see there's been some press coverage on that, and other people are taking interest. We've also been to other local authorities such as Newham and Westminster and Enfield, who are delivering similar pilots but in a slightly different way. So roving patrols are something which are quite common, but they're funding through the housing revenue accounts. So they're linked to estates particularly, which is something that we may want to explore in the future based on the fact that we have such a disproportionate amount of council stock in comparison to other local authorities, even our neighbouring local authorities. We've invested 3 million in upgrading our existing CCTV cameras, and we're looking at how we move our current suite from one location to Tomb Street. What this has done for us is the work that our operatives do, because they're not visible, people don't actually think about what they do. So the partnership agreement that we have with the Met around Operation Davilia, what we've seen is actually an increase in support for investigations, which has led to a number of positive outcomes. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that investment as well. In addition to that, the consultancy. Now, some people would ask you, why did you bring in a consultant? Well, the answer is simple, isn't it? You can't have people set the exam and then mark the papers. So that decision was about having somebody independent, really review the service. And we've seen the 8 core areas of priority. We've seen how that's translated into a clear mission around themes, place and timing. The other thing I wanted to speak to is the engagement on the ground, which is when we did the ASB Awareness Week, we saw a sharp increase in reporting, which indicates that there is a need for stronger engagement, and anecdotally at least, when we increase our visibility, when we go into areas, when we talk to people and let them know that they're listening, they actually report. So this brings me on to this thing about communication. So our community safety e-newsletter has been going for about 6 to 7 months. Now we're at a point where it's opened by 70,000 residents. This is fantastic. They're opening it, they're responding. On average, we get 4 to 8 requests for walkabouts. About 60% of those walkabouts are in areas that we already have area action plans in. So that means that we're focusing resort in the right places. Some things that we've noted that are slightly different. So 75% of the walkabouts are requested by women, which supports and feeds into the Women's Safety Annual Safety Survey, and also supports the data that we've received from the resident insights. But then there's been a noticeable trend around lighting, especially where there's unadopted land. So this is land where a housing association may have that land, or City of London, where the onus is on them to actually deal with this. And this is coming through quite strongly. We've also seen an increase in requests for walkabouts for our housing associations. What has this meant for us? What it's meant is that we've made a change in the way that we do things, which is we've set up an ASB strategic board, which now sits within the Community Safety Partnership. For those of you that sat on OSC, you saw our presentation on the Community Safety Partnership, and also the annual strategic assessment, which really leans into the crime aspect. So I'm not going to touch on that here today. One of the things that we've done is also elected members briefing. So elected members every 6 weeks receive a briefing from community safety and regulatory services. This will update you on consultations, from licensing to the public space consultations to our recent VAW conference as well. So for me as a lead member, my priorities have been around strengthening the systems of transparency and accountability. This has been a big priority for me. So how do we create more systemized ways of working? There are a number of things that residents and professionals can rely on, but do they know it exists? For example, a community MARAC is where if there's ongoing ASB and a victim or actually the alleged perpetrator has support needs, a risk action plan. We need to make sure that that information is visible. We need to be promoting this to cross-council, but also to our partners so that they're aware that this referral pathway exists. We also have a Kikuyu forum, which has been complemented for its innovation, yet still how many people know it exists and that they can lodge that, request that pathway, and that's explored. And this is really, really important. In addition to this, what was traditionally known as community triggers, which is now called ASB reviews, how many residents are aware that they can do this? So this is where you've reported a ASB or a crime on your estate or to a housing association, you feel that partners have taken no action. What you can do is actually put in for that review, and that case will be looked at. So my point being about a systemized approach, transparency and accountability, and that's why we're here today. Stephen's already talked about our 3 priorities within the Community Safety Partnership, which is tackling crime, anti-behaviours, hotspots, reducing violence against women and girls, children and young people, and building trust and confidence. I say all this to just make it clear. Residents are reporting issues. We're listening and we're taking action. The question is, are those actions impactful? And that's what this commission should be asking. My response is yes, but there's work to do. The things I want to highlight about cross-council working that has been impactful has been our commitment to work with landlord services, public health, and community safety. So I've already talked about us having a disproportionate amount of council stock. When we looked at our ASB dashboards, the number one concern in many instances for residents was drug dealing and drug usage on our estates. This is very concerning because not all of our estates will have security doors, therefore we need to have a response to that. So what was our response? Our response was to go to public health, to go to our commissioned services through our Combating Drugs Partnership and say, this is a problem. we need to work together on this. And we finally got to a point where we've now got 3 pilots that will be taking place. So one will be on St Saviour's Estate, which is in London Bridge, has a really, really large landmass. It's difficult to cover. And on the strength of that, what we'll be able to do is look at estates like Rennie in the South Bermondsey ward and respond to some of the challenges that we've seen in St George's. But we can't do it all. So these are the estates that we're looking at for now. Brimington is one. There's been a number of closure orders in the Nunhead and Queens Road estate, and this has been in response to Cuckoo. The third is Nelson and Portland, which is in the Walworth Road area. So the point that I'm making here is that we're not just talking about cross-council working, we're actually doing things and moving into that space and taking action. And residents play a fundamental role in that. And the lessons and insights from there will inform how we work on our estates going forward. The other thing that I want to speak to today is the challenges we have around mental health. So through the work that we've been doing, we've noticed that we've had an increase in complaints around people that have mental health. We've not backed down from that conversation. We've taken that conversation to the NHS in particular and said to them, you need to honour that information sharing protocol, because we know that if a person is attached to adult social care or public health within the council, they have a strong relationship with the community safety team, and that's what Stephen was speaking about. But actually, when an adult is discharged into the community that may have a complex mental health history or forensic history, where the NHS is responsible, actually that's not being communicated, and that shows up on our estates. That shows up for housing association properties, as well as in areas where we have people that are homeowners. The key thing for us is, what is our response? And it's taking that challenge to the NHS, and that work is ongoing today. So what I really wanted to highlight in addition to that, and I will stop after this, I promise, I know that I'm quite riveting in my style of speech. Just to acknowledge that the community safety team has worked really, really hard to increase trust and confidence in the police, and it was about creating those visible touch points for residents. What we've seen is a commitment from our Met colleagues to attend 2 of our neighbourhood forums out of 4. This is a big improvement. So what we're seeing alongside ward panels, alongside their Met Engage platform, they've made a commitment to attend 2 neighbourhood forums, which is a new touch point. In addition to that, what we've seen is that fight for town centre policing. Before I was cabinet member, I'm aware that the community safety team were really, really perplexed and challenged by the complex problems in the centre of the borough. And, one of the things that we've done is brought the deputy mayor for MOPAC down and really, really push for that additional town centre policing. And we now have that, which is in Walworth Road and in Peckham. This is fundamental. As some of you may know, just 4 weeks ago, a young man was shot outside a leisure centre, outside a library, outside a theatre, in one of the areas that the community safety team has consistently had to fight for resource to be there. Where is the uproar and cry? But if a bullet had caught a woman, a cyclist, an elderly person, the press coverage would have been humongous. So there's lots of work that is happening that we don't see, but it is taking place. The last thing I want to really point out is the Southwark Policing Oversight Board. It's the first of its kind in London. It's modelled off the Greater Manchester model, which is an ethics committee. But what we've chosen to do is to allow local residents and people to be trained up to sit on this board, where they actually hold the police to account on their local trust and confidence plan. And that meeting is not held in private, it's held in public. So recently we visited places like Kingswood, we've been to Peckham Library, we've also been to Walworth Town Centre. And what that shows is there is an appetite for people to understand what's happening with the police. There is an appetite for communities to engage with the police, but it's creating the right touch points. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that wide-ranging presentation. Very much appreciated. Can I move to commission members? Any questions? See Graham start.
Thank you. Thank you for your report and thank you for speaking to us so passionately. The report doesn't have the word alcohol in it. I've got some concerns. I think that, well, I understand from the data that alcohol is, it might be a reason for causation, but is often related with domestic violence, is often related to public space antisocial behaviour, antisocial behaviour on licensed premises, antisocial behaviour in the home. Wondered if you'd like to address that and speak to me about the role that alcohol might play in problems around the borough and why it's been left out of the report.
As I stated when I mentioned the public space protection orders, ASB related to street drinking is something that we're covering. So as part of that consultation, we've done extensive work with our partners within the Combating Drugs Partnership, which Stephen actually co-chairs with the Strategic Director for Public Health. So we do acknowledge the causation around alcohol and substance abuse. Just last week, I was out doing the head count for SREP around rough sleepers, and we understand that many of the residents and the rough sleeping population is actually affected by alcohol and substance abuse. The work that we did with the Metropolitan Police includes targeted engagement through Project Adder. And as you know, in visiting St. George's, where you invite me to your yearly conferences, one of the things that I raised was the challenges that you've experienced as a wards councillor with the number of hostels in that area. And those challenges that you've mentioned to me are similar in London Bridge and West Bermondsey around the Manor House. So we're aware of the causation. We're working hard with our partners to ensure that that support is there. But within the Combating Drugs Partnership that sits as a subgroup within that body, that's where that work is being done. Should you wish that the Commission actually looks into this in more detail, I think it's something that can be facilitated. I'm going to leave that for Stephen.
I'll perhaps just add quickly to that an example, which is that our commissioning of treatment and recovery services isn't just linked to drugs, it's linked to alcohol as well. So there are specific services that the council's commissioning for people to access support with alcohol. But we also work with licensing teams. Licensing teams work closely with police and others, issues around licensed premises. So the data and analysis includes that. The report's a summary, really. It's in there. In the full strategic assessment that drives the community safety plan, alcohol is featured in there as well.
Thank you. Questions? So Sabina first. Okay.
Thanks. I'm glad you have a nice report and everything. The key things that concerns me, which the tenants, especially Peckham call to say, and other people talk to other people and so forth. So the common denominator is why they don't report the things, because it takes too long on the phone. They do not want to give up their details when they eventually get through, and so therefore that puts them off. So they contact me instead, thinking I could fix everything. The second thing I'd like to say is yes, we have been working with you, and thank you. Some of the tenants are saying that there's less crime. Some of the people that was dealing in school time, they've gone. Some of them are not visible anymore, and they're happy about that. And but we do need more lights. And when the boy was shot, in the lighting there's poor on the square, and there's too many places to hide. In which we need better lighting behind the Barclays Bank, because I saw a gang go through there and people just kind of move away from them. So we need more lighting, and I think the lighting will deter a lot of it. People say, well, it will encourage people to come there. but it also not having the lighting encourages the naughty behavior to go there because nobody's going to see them. So I I give Jack his jacket after all our talking. I noticed that you have done something. So what we have to do now is to make sure that the cameras are turned on and they're checked.
In regards to your statement about reporting, we can't take action on what we don't know. So that's the first thing. The reason why we're able to come back and talk about the data and the insights and actually able to analyze the impact is because there is reporting. So without the reporting, it's problematic. In regards to taking too long, are you referring to crime reporting to the Met or via the councils?
Both.
So in both instances, there are options to report online.
Some of these people who report to me don't do it online. Some of them they even complain about not being able to go to the TA meeting because it's online and they don't deal with that. But how you remind me, the meetings that happen monthly, the safety meetings, so the wardens don't have no power. Most of the time they ask a question and they ask for a number. They don't know what to do. So the people are saying, well, what's the point of them coming if they can't tell us anything? So they need that if you send somebody there, that person needs to be briefed and that person needs to know, well, contact me on this number, not the generic number, because these are specific items in regard to the TAs and stuff.
Thank you. So the key, we will definitely go away and take away your feedback. So just to be clear, on both the council's website and the Met's website, the new platform to report crime is Met Engage. You can also report crime to Crime Stoppers if you want to remain anonymous. 101 is quite tedious. We've been speaking to the Met about that, but the reality is these are the options to report crime. Drug dealing is an offence that should be reported to the police, and you have to keep the good fight up. And we will come back to you on in regards to call times to get through to community safety, because we have opening hours. That service in terms of responding to calls will end at 10 p.m. But for deployment of the resources, we need reporting. In regards to the question of lighting, that's something that we can go away and look at, but we have to be realistic. At the moment, we're going through a number of challenges within the council. We are trying to improve our lighting services, but we can go away and work with our colleagues. But generally, there are quarterly, every 2 weeks, there are audits of the lights, which takes place from the lighting team. They go and do these inspections and they label them, but some of the lighting belongs to different people, which I've discovered. So we can come back and talk about that. And you also talked about turning on the cameras. I think that that's really important, that where cameras are located, that residents understand that they can play a role. Because in saying that community safety is everybody's business, it does mean that you do realise there is a number that you can call if you see an incident reported and say to them the location that you're in. And if that camera is not pointed in that direction, that could be done depending on what type of camera it is, whether it has that agility or mobility to do that. Myself and Stephen, in regards to your 4 questions about wardens, making sure PCSOs are not the only people that are at the ward panel meetings. I know that Stephen has raised this several times with the borough commander as well as individual inspectors, and that's why we've asked that an inspector or a sergeant attends those neighbourhood forums, because I've been to a few ward panels and I've noticed that there are PCSOs. The most important thing about those ward panels is that it's about setting the priorities of that ward and making those promises and double checking what the action has been at that meeting. So it's an important place to communicate. Could it be strengthened? Yes. Is it within our gift? No. Will we continue to advocate for the right people at the right level to be in those spaces? Yes. In regards to the police giving away their numbers, that's not something that I've seen as a common practice. But what I do know is that if you go onto the platform, Net Engage, you can actually address an email to a specific person that you may be working with. the emails are available.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. And the safety,
Sorry to be introduced.
sorry. And the safety buzzer you give out to women, can I have some for my women in my board?
Yes.
Because yeah? Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. Leo.
Sorry. Thanks for this presentation. I find them really reassuring in a way because I think these are such stubbornly persistent problems that have been raging for as long as I've been a councillor, long before. And it's what I find reassuring is that we have the organisational confidence to take a cold hard look at what works and what doesn't work. We've got strong political leadership driving forward this agenda in terms of policy energy. So I think that's a really good, healthy place to start because I see approaches to community safety in other parts of the country. It's not always like this. So just, just to recognise that as a starting point. The report's really interesting. It hones in on some key issues that are really persistent in Bermondsey. The seasonal side in particular, every year we'll have a kind of point in the summer where it's hot, it's lazy, people are looking for things to do. There's always a spike in antisocial behaviour and sometimes serious violence, including fatalities that we've seen at points in the summer. So it's reassuring to see that. I'd be keen to understand a bit more about it's described at quite high levels what the more data informed approach means, but what specific sorts of data are you talking about there? I'd like to understand more. I think also the Southwark Policing Oversight Board is sort of fascinating again. There's that deep-seated culture around notice as well in Bermondsey and surrounding area. You just don't grasp on people in your area if things happen. And we've had amazing community safety wardens in safe neighbourhood policing in Bermondsey, but it continues to be an ongoing issue. So I'd be curious to know how that gets through to young people to really create that expectation, culture of transparency and accountability, as you talked about. To get onto kind of an area that I thought might be, and I think you sort of touched on the big area that I thought was not part of this presentation. Graham's question about alcohol was something you touched at the end, Stephen. I'd really like to, it's great that we have a focus on victims, their experience, and talking to them, understanding their concern, their perceptions, what we need to do, and we can't ever back down on that. So this is not a however, it's an in addition to. I would like to see with this sort of presentation, maybe this is a piece of work going forward, a much deeper dive into the experience, the background of perpetrators. So is this something young advisors could help design, perhaps? What is their social life like? What is their skills situation, their progression in work, their perception of their job prospects, their exposure to crime networks, their exposure and consumption of social media, their mental health situation, their experience of affordability, what's around them. It's pretty demoralising if you've got only prospects of affordable housing and these glossy things that there's a sharp inequality in our borough, in our country, and that is so much part of what makes these problems sort of persistent and stubborn. So I'd like to understand what we could, we talk about prevention pathways, but I think a much broader review of the experience and background of perpetrators, including and probably especially young men, would be a really useful supplement to this work. So I'm just sort of ask a big question and some light on that. I'll leave it at that for now. There's one other bit just on lighting that was really good. This is learning from the Great Estates programme that just has a bit of example and run with the light follows behaviour pilot that we did on Brandon Estate. It was really effective. And it was often quite cheap but really high impact sorts of interventions you can do in terms of tone, luminosity, the placing of lighting, who's designing it, where it goes, The summer. Yeah.
What year?
It was in 2021. Completed.
And is it called what?
Like the United States.
I'm going to start in reverse. So, in terms of young men, the theme for yesterday's, we've been an outlier in some ways. So, the elimination of violence against women and girls, the international edge to it is online harm and that sort of online regulation space. And one of the key things that we wanted to showcase as a borough is actually to stand with her. We need to better understand the experiences of young men specifically, and boys. And we've made a strong commitment to invest in the social capital of young men in recognition that when you live in a borough that has sharp socio-economic deprivation, it's important that we understand where the resource is. And that's why we work with the partnerships that we work with. So we have someone here from the Southwark Youth Advisors that works along our Mayans consortium, which is made up of 60 different organisations that range from universal services to prevention services to tertiary support, which is detached youth workers that are specialised in dealing with young people that are at high risk or already involved in gang life and violence. In terms of what we're doing as a local authority, one of the things that Yvette Cooper did when before Shabana came into force was the work around the DRIVE programme, which really focuses on the perpetrator's experience and understanding that complex history and the sorts of things they're engaged in. So it's looking at alcohol and substance abuse dependencies. So if you recall, there was an instance in the borough where there was a tragedy where a young man went on to murder 3 generations of a family. And actually, when you looked at the back history, one of the things that became apparent is one of his conditions was that he shouldn't be smoking cannabis, for example. He was. And had there been quicker intervention on that, it could have saved people's lives. And actually, as you go deeper into the case history about where he was at and his problems, like mental health disclosures, the area that he lived in, the lack of support, but people were reporting. So that's a piece of work that we're working on. We are talking about male allyship within the walk space. In regards to serious youth violence, we're looking at that data and we're not experiencing what I call the black fatigue, which is in Southwark in particular, we see what the police would call IC3, young black males who are disproportionately victims, but they're also perpetrators. This means that there's work that needs to be done to make sure that the experiences of young men as a whole is worked on, but actually looking at the experiences of young black boys in particular and what are the issues that are pushing them down that pathway. And it does go back to the key things: cost of living crisis, affordability in terms of housing, and also issues around schooling. One of the things that I spoke to at the Walk conference was my personal experience of being a victim of child sexual abuse. That was the first time I disclosed that publicly. What it was is I equally could have been a perpetrator. By the time I was 11, I was smoking cigarettes daily, which continues today. By the time I was 13, I was stabbed and I had stabbed people. So what changed my life around was actually intervention. People that were on the ground, civic leaders, that's including community leaders, social workers. The thing is, it's about having people that are trauma informed to understand the signs of issues that are affecting young boys in particular. There's a lot of work at the moment about the lost boys, which is a piece of work that we should all look into, because it's not just black boys, it's the plight of working class boys. And it's about destigmatizing young boys. So at the conference, we were keen not to use words such as toxic masculinity, and we chose words such as evolving masculinities. We brought Andy Hill from VoiceBox to speak about this, because the algorithms, the boys are not looking for the algorithms are chasing the boys. And from one accessing one piece of content, they're being flooded. And what we're saying is actually we want to take a stand with him too. So that's a piece of work that's really, really important to us. in terms of the Southwark Policing Oversight Board and the work and how that crossovers into the safer neighbourhood space, what we're looking at is the actual trust and confidence plan of that RBCU, which is shared with Lambeth. The Met have set their own internal culture of how they do things, and what we do is actually hold them to account on that and actually push back and challenge them. The Met will tell us how they've engaged with young people. So the youth advisors have done some work with them on stop and search in particular. But I think it goes broader than that. One of the things I've asked the Met to stop doing is to bring young Black children to speak on stop and search. It saturates the conversation and contributes to Black fatigue. What I want to hear is diversity of thought, diversity of views from young people across the borough. We had initially last year tried to work with youth services to see if we could set up a community safety partnership that was for young people. Because whilst we're talking about malice, we're talking about men in that space of youth violence, they are disproportionately perpetrators, they are disproportionately victims. What we're hearing for young people is not that fraud is at the top of their agenda, that they're more concerned about knife crime, they're more concerned about violence. We need to bring partners into that space, and we need to work with young people to co-design solutions. And we can do that, but people need to be willing to be brave, and they need to change their ways of working. And that's something that we've pushed to some of those teams. I would like to invite, would you like to say something about this?
So yes, once again, I'm a part of the Young Advisors team. As Councillor Evans previously mentioned, we do work on a range of projects, one of them being WARG. In my work with WARG, we've done a lot of surveys, and we do hear sort of recurring themes of what people's main concerns are, particularly around situations such as lighting, areas where they see people hiding, harassment, men particularly not respecting their voice and them saying no in their personal space. When it comes to young people, a large portion of our work revolves around engaging with them and sort of getting their insights and opinions on what council does. One of the main things we hear is their general safety is one of their main concerns, whether that be knife crime. They don't feel safe walking home from school. They don't feel like they can go out with their friends. They don't have spaces in which they can go out with their friends. And so a lot of the themes have already been mentioned, but they are the recurring themes. And I think that says something that people actually do feel that way, and that the council has acknowledged it. And it's more so about young people not seeing an impact. And when they are seeing an impact, it's not an impact that impacts them. It's more so adults who made the decision and it's not for their betterment. And so I think that's one thing that should be seen going forward.
I'd like you to introduce yourself. Did you say your name?
Kiana.
And so in terms of the work that the Policing Oversight Board has done, they've looked specifically at the engagement with young people, and they'll often come to us and show us. And one of the things that we've done as a board is ask them to actually give us the feedback from the young people themselves, as opposed to telling us the work that we're doing. Because just like got her name now, is it Kiana?
Yeah.
And Kiana has said one of the things that young people have said repeatedly is that they get told these things, they get told these promises, but they don't actually get the feedback. So this is something that we're really pushing hard for. And through the neighbourhoods work, we hope that more young people will engage with that process. We saw a fantastic example in the north of the borough where the neighbourhood coordinator, Georgina, actually did targeted engagement with young people, and they literally echoed the sentiments that we've heard here, that they want co-located spaces or spaces that they can do activities in. Sometimes it wasn't even about having a decked out building, it was just about a space where they could feel safe, because they didn't sometimes feel safe on the streets. And then you talked about the data-informed approach. I'm going to leave that to Stephen, because I will go around and round in circles on that one.
It's quite a long conversation. There was a lot in what you said that I'd be more than happy to continue outside of this meeting. We do look at data on perpetrators, and we do deeper dives into particular issues to look at just the sorts of things that that you talked about. We're doing a specific piece of work at the moment around the Elephant Castle, which looks at both victims and perpetrators, and it's quite intensive stuff to do. Tries and look in more depth than just the numbers of offences and where they occur and that sort of stuff, and trying to really get underneath that problem, and therefore what are the interventions that would make the most difference. The only other two things I would add, based on what you were saying, is, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. Community safety is the sharp end of inequality and deprivation, and the disproportionality in the criminal justice system is shocking. And so some of this isn't really rocket science. But there are things that we are doing, which aren't, kind of early intervention. Our violence reduction unit, formerly known as the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub, works with a very difficult cohort of young people already involved in crime. And some of the results of that are astonishing. It takes a kind of whole family approach, looks at the needs of that individual and their families, and tracking the numbers on that. Over 90% of them not reoffending within 6 months, which is an extraordinary piece of work working with already involved in some quite serious crime. So there's some really good practice examples there, but none of this is easy stuff to do. And I wish I could promise that there'll be another crime. It's hard to do.
Thank you. I just have a couple of follow-ups, if I may. So, just again on the data point. So, the bit that would be helpful to understand, maybe just to cover slightly the previous question, was what is the difference that we would practically see in terms of the data that was being used before, the data that's being used now, and then I guess linked to that, underlying capabilities within the council, whether it's technology or insights, or do we feel like we have the strength and capability within the council to be able to interrogate and work with that data and serve that data up? Be able to work with it then to inform our targeting as part of this strategy. And then my second question was then on the theme of the sort of place spaces review, and thank you, Stephen, for sharing some of the sort of points around what we understand from the Women's Safety Survey, etc. And Kiana, your points around what you're hearing from young people in terms of what having safe spaces, being safe to walk home from school, but also just having a place to go and with friends, and that's really helpful. There's something I just wanted to pick up there in terms of, I guess, there's young people having a space to go. Play is, I guess, we have a stereotypical view of it swings, it slides, it's not young people's play. What we heard from Make Space for Girls in their report in one of our prior meetings was actually it's about sort of other creative spaces where it's obvious to just sort of community around that is a space for young people to go and spend time, where actually often here, a picnic bench on an estate where young people may go and hang out, actually other residents may look at that as like they're a nuisance, and therefore that's something that also came through the Next Space for Girls report, was like that's just a sense of that's not a place for you, it's not a place for young teenage girls, it's not a place for teenagers. So I just wondered if there's, just wanted to pull on a thread there, I guess, any thoughts on, do we feel like we're doing enough, and this is a cross-council thing, on providing those spaces, may not always be a hall or a youth centre, but thinking, I guess, the streets for people, looking into our park play spaces, to provide spaces where young people can feel safe, go and spend time, and then not be, I guess, dragged into other things as well. Do you want to build on that?
I do want to build on that. That's absolutely the. There's lots of the questions in this, but I wonder if there's, the police have their secure by design guidance that they refresh every year. Where is the sociability by design guidance that is the other side of the coin? which then touches on all of the things that Councillor Hicks is talking about. There's a broader agenda about protecting community and cultural spaces, making them affordable, accessible, approachable. I can point to so many things that have got in my 12 years as a councillor that were great things for young people, spaces for young people to go to, and also lots of things that have arrived as well in that time. But I think a review of that kind, just to make sure that safety and sociability, but the broad, very complex prevention agenda alongside the reactive work that we did is also seen around. So yeah, the sort of sociability thing, I suppose, is what I want to build on that.
Yeah, you mentioned perfectly. One of the main things we hear is sort of, especially area-based regions such as Peckham, Bermondsey, is sort of the lack of ownership young people feel within their communities. So not only do they not feel seen from a social perspective in terms of their young people, but sort of in the background, it's more so they also don't have physical presence aside from schools. And in schools, they have to follow a strict routine. There's no more leniency. School isn't a place of fun. And so a lot of young people seem to feel as though they have to claim that ownership, and some choose not to do that in the most positive way, but that is sort of their attempt at taking back what they see as theirs. And so I think, as you mentioned previously, young people aren't asking for the moon, they're asking for the space that's theirs, resources they can use, opportunities they can have. And even if that is a park bench, they want a park bench where they know they can sit and they won't be pestered and bothered and asked to leave. And I think that sort of stems from a systemic misalignment and sort of understandings between whether that be local residents or past buyers who see them as a nuisance or as a menace, where they just want to sit with their friends, but there's sort of no space for them to go. So then they go somewhere else, but then people there don't want them there. So then they just pass around until they end up on the streets. That's when we see ASB and drug usage, that's when gangs get involved. A lot of young people that are involved in ASB or are involved with gangs, when they speak about how they got into that, it's usually because they have nowhere else to be. They didn't want to be at home, so they can just approach. And so I think it's sort of hammering down on that foundation and providing them those spaces. It's win-win. Residents feel more comfortable. Young people have a space. There's less crime. And all of these issues are linked. And I think it's more so about the decisions you make and the infrastructures you build and sort of how you evolve the spaces that already exist, because there are plenty of spaces that young people can use. It's just more so they're not in use, or youth centres have been closed down. A lot of young people actually complain about that, surprisingly. I myself have never been to one, but I hear so many people speak about it in the areas we go to. And I think particularly in areas such as Peckham and Bermondsey, they were such core elements of those communities. And I think taking that away has sort of removed that youth presence in communities, and that should be relooked at.
Sorry, finally, if I could just comment on that data point. We're getting better at it, I think, is the short answer. We have a data analysis team with a community safety who do a lot of this sort of work, understanding people, places, trying to do what I was talking about before, in terms of really getting underneath what's actually happening in this place. We also work closely with the analysts in public health who work with data on our populations, and they support what we do. And actually just today, and you've seen the posters and stuff around the building about the Southwark Insights programme. We're in conversations with Southwark University about ways in which they can work with us to improve the practice around data research and insight. So there are partners out there that we're working with as well to help us to do this. That specific piece of work around the council I mentioned includes the likes of the Cambridge Centre for Evidence-Based Policing, so that the people outside of the organisation are working with us to try and improve that practice and develop our knowledge and actually the industry's wider knowledge of how to do these things.
Thank you.
I do agree with Stephen that we're getting better, but in response to your answer, the question, what the difference would be, I think for me, a key thing is about residents actually in reporting that there's been an improvement in their lives, um, and making sure we're looking at the right factors. So in order for us to get to the point where we could actually do a piece of research on ASB on estates, we had to get that data, and it's taken some time. And in addition to that, the data wasn't drilled down enough. One of the things I've been advocating for as a lead member is it's not just about the joint strategic needs assessments, it's about targeted intervention and engagement, which speaks to Leo's first point about boys. What are the factors that are making them more a risk, and what are the factors that are making young people as a whole more of a risk? And we need to invest in that piece of work. So analyzing data is very important to me because that makes a difference. When we see trends come up, what are we doing in response to that? How are we digging deeper into that? We've also recently had some problems with the Nets system Connect, which was raised at OSC. And as a CSP, we've written to them to say, look, your system doesn't allow us to drill down enough into the data. It puts us at risk of losing some of our cognitive impact areas around licensing. Our data analysts on both sets of teams in regulatory services and community safety are working hard to actually get this data, to have this in effect. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. The other thing with the Met's data system is we've lost something called school desk. So I've been approached by head teachers from schools talking about their inability to understand what's happened to children when they're not at school. So, for example, previously, if a child had witnessed a horrific crime and they were stopped by the police, there would be a part of the Connect system, which was called the school desk, which would upload that information, and the head teachers in the school know that system is now broken. So we're looking at different ways to make sure that this is brought to the attention of the Met, and that they actually do some work around that. One of the things that Kiana spoke to was, what are we doing around our school patrols and stuff like that? The Met have done some fantastic work around being outside school, but they're not actually communicating some of that work. So whilst Sabina is speaking about it, the positive outcomes in Peckham, Kiana's saying that across the borough there are other spaces where young people are saying that this is still a problem. To your second point, underlying capability, I would say at present, no. There's lots of work that's being done. In February, there was a procurement. We've got some procurement to change the software, and there's lots of work that is happening around that. And that is to make data analysis a bit easier, but the team are committed to doing data analysis, and they're sharing that on a quarterly basis and regularly providing updates. Thank you.
And just to clarify on that, that's a new system for recording data on antisocial behaviours. It's not the crime stuff.
Thank you for that. Are there any final questions before we close on this topic? No. Thank you very much for moderating.
Can I just ask one question of the Commission, which is that the Commission speaks to other Commission chairs. So, for example, the issue about school desk might be useful to go to the Education Committee. And we're talking about cross-council working, cross-commission working would be really useful. So we've also flagged up the issue around mental health in the borough. If the chairs could maybe look into what's happening with the health space in terms of the NHS and the ICB board, and thinking about that information sharing protocol in light of the disproportionality that is flagging up, especially in regards to our housing association, our council estates, and also to pick up on both Graham and Leo's points about our places and spaces. I think it's important that within the house space, there's a commitment to review some of the work that Combating Drugs Partnerships is actually doing about substance and alcohol misuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll close on that topic. Thank you. Really appreciate the time and the conversation. So we'll move on then to the next item. So we're going to move on to further focus on the place-based scrutiny review and planning and regeneration. Joining us to talk to this. So if I could invite officers to come up and introduce yourselves, please, and provide a summary of the paper that's provided and circulated with the agenda. That'd be great.
Sorry, I'm Neil Kirby, Assistant Director of Sustainable Grove, which used to be known as Regeneration. And broadly, what we want to do tonight is talk about both the policy and the delivery of play spaces and play areas within the borough.
Hi, I'm Juliet Seymour. I'm the Assistant Director for Building Control Policy and Historic Property.
So my bit's probably the easiest bit, which is about delivery. So a combination of neighbourhood still funding, community infrastructure money generated through the planning system. We have been investing that very heavily in terms of play areas, both on housing estates and also within parks. So working closely across the council to deliver that over the last year and a half, really, of the current allocation, and as part of a wider £20 million allocation for the borough. Obviously, naturally, the money isn't in the right places for that to be prioritised. In certain areas with the greatest need, that funding isn't available to be allocated, which has been an issue. And so, broadly, it's a positive response in terms of trying to address the dire financial position that council is in terms of some of those spaces. So Juliet can cover the policy side.
So we're currently at the start of reviewing the Southwark plan. So a big part of that is looking at open space needs and green infrastructure needs. So we're going to be commissioning a study to review where we are with those at the moment, progress since last plan was adopted in April 2022, and looking forward to what the provision might be in the next version of the Southwark plan. As part of that, we're doing an open needs assessment. The objectives are to identify current and future needs for open space, assessing deficits and surpluses in quantity, quality and accessibility, informing the policies and what they should be by evaluating existing assets, guiding future provision and supporting designations and updating policies. This will include open space provision, biodiversity and climate resistance, guiding land use decision on opportunities to bring forward open space and greening, particularly in areas of deficiency. And the outputs are a comprehensive assessment, boundaries, designations, assessing all the things I was just talking about, particularly quantity, quality, typologies, different residential areas, different levels of deficiency, looking at gaps in provision, identifying them and considering current deficiencies, future demand based on population trends and planned growth, and then preparing a green infrastructure strategy to include mapping and recommendations which draw on the findings of the OSNA, sync the sites of importance for nature conservation review, and emerging local nature recovery strategy. So the needs assessment and the green infrastructure strategy need to come together. They're expecting to be prepared next year, and they will help then be part of the initial reviews that will lead to the policy preparation and so on.
Thank you. Before we move to questions, I should just note, Councillor Mandel's apologies having to leave a minute just to note that. Can we open to questions? I have one to get started, if that's okay. So, just on the open space needs assessment, forgive me, could you just bring to life a little bit how does that needs assessment consider the type and the sort of purpose of the open space, or is it just open space, and also the users for that space?
So there's a process that we follow, which is set out by the journey, which we have to follow to meet London requirements. But if there's anything in addition, we would follow that. There's a typology of all different types of open space, and that covers the users and what the space is used for. And then there's also things about how built up the area is, how far people should walk to spaces, if they're local or regional or district. And then what you do is you map all the spaces, what they're used for, and then you look at how many people live there and how far to walk to get to those spaces, how accessible they are. And then you map all of that, and that gives you deficiency, and then it also gives you provision. And then you look at all the current developments that are in the pipeline and what improvements might get made. And then you can see the full picture. And then you back up all the current green infrastructure, all of the post green infrastructure, and then you can overlay that over the other spaces, so you can see how you can get around as well as where you may visit your recreation. So no, sorry, that's a quick whiz through.
That's no, it's very helpful because it's a bit of a black box when you sort of hear about the term. Leo, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks for the reports and the update. I'm always conscious of planners sort of approach is quite, because just the nature of the process you follow, the nature of the planning system is quite procedural and algorithmic even. And I think it's really great that we've grouped these items together, first one, because there's obviously a very clear chord from that to here. So I want to sort of explore some of that a bit. When it comes to the sort of types of open space, let's sort of throw wording, very high level abstract wording kind of policy to one side for a second. It's important because if you don't have it, there's no mechanisms for delivering stuff. But the qualities of these spaces, I would like us to be in a position where we have this kind of relentless kind of appetite to be thinking about new and better ways to set up open spaces for different people with different backgrounds, different incomes, different ages, that are genuinely attractive and genuinely aid mutual visibility of people across the community. I note that in the report here, you've got, again, this is just the sort of the nature of the planning system. You've got principles of secure by design, environmental prevention, environmental design, environmental stuff is taken into account. I have at least 3 examples where I've reported sill applications for picnic benches on green spaces on a housing estate, and that comes along, swipes it away, saying absolutely no, it's going to promote such behaviour, perception of crime, and so on. So I just wonder if there is space for us to refresh place-based guidance and draw from all the best practice, of which there's lots in the borough, across the city, across the country, internationally. Because when it's done well, it really dignifies the place and makes people feel like their community cares about them. So that's kind of the first bit, and then that links to my second bit, which is about delivery of these projects. And I'm going to take the opportunity again, afraid, to draw attention to the Alexis Street space in Southwark, which is an area of high crime, high ASB, fatal stabbing injury in the immediate area. It's an area that doesn't have park fit, sort of 10 minutes. Got to walk across the tracks, and it's a bit of a trek to get to the park. It's not in your immediate neighbourhood, no doorstep. We put all of our local serving boxes project 2020, the whole thing was signed off, and we agreed. Still to this day, we're not on site. We've lost over 30% value of our still to inflation. It's a long saga from things to this should be a really straightforward project. What are we doing to really make sure that no projects are funded that have the community political will behind? So food transits just end up not being delivered in a reasonable time frame. Because we've got to do something different. And the second bit I'd ask is, can we get to a point where we've got flexibility about the status of the land, because we've got such enormous, we've got great estates, right, in Southwark, with considerable open space, green space on. But when it comes to bringing forward propositions for what is built on those spaces, it often gets slipped through the cracks. Is it an HRA project? Is it a regen project? Is it an environment arts project, leisure project, as happened with this one? But also we hear that the HRA Act to keep to the maintenance that rules out a whole suite of attractive things that you would otherwise have in the brief and in the project, as again has happened on this one. So I just wonder, is there scope for a simpler mechanism for saying, yes, this is a green space, it's within the footprint of the council estate, let's take it out, put it in the general fund, and make it work more effectively.
So I guess that's probably most times with me. So in terms of deliverability, what we've been doing is making sure in terms of the current local SIL allocations, there is a named project manager and departments are committed and signed up to that. It has taken a bit of time, particularly with some departments, it's been a lot easier than others. We've learned a lot of lessons being learned from the previous allocation, which was about 4 years ago, which did fund the Alexis Street Rural Road project in terms of moving those schemes forward. So being able to charge that project management cost against local SIL as well. So when there's an issue about a lack of a manager or lack of funding to do it, that's not an issue, that can be funded. So we've done that with this time around to try and improve on that. The other one just around whose space is it? It's identifying early on which department is in the ownership of, and can we hand that over to the community? How do we do that? We're doing that very actively on the scheme at Courage Gardens, just on Park Street at the moment, working with the community there, and with a very responsive response from housing who happen to own the land, quite happy handing it over, and having a management agreement with the local residents to maintain it. So we're putting local SIL into that. As part of that, we'll be looking in terms of maintenance costs. One of the play areas we're funding in London Bridge, the Alfred Salter play area, we're looking at having a 5-year management contract as part of the deal. So we're capitalising those costs on the assumption that it's going to obviously otherwise create maintenance implications for housing. And housing, as everyone's aware, that funding isn't available to maintain the quality needed to provide the decent quality play provision. So we've been looking to learn some lessons from it. Clearly, we could obviously do more. I think the issue partly is just that lack of funding, and lack of funding particularly around revenue, around maintenance.
That's really helpful. Yeah, thank you. We've got brilliant charities take on many of these sites in a heartbeat. Make a big songs asked about it, as they do. I just when a site like this comes forward, where it's it's a new park, it's a significant new park with a brilliant vision around what we could do there, built with the community. It's not work trying to deliver it within the council, because you've got round circles on brief, on procurement, for whatever, for a variety of reasons. So it's reassuring to know that there is the option to have community ownership. So I wonder if we could be more proactive in approaching. First, we're absolutely blessed that Southwark have such strong and often very well funded big endowment charities. So I wonder if that's part of the solution.
I think it potentially is, and it's having that conversation with our parks people and housing about what's possible. So, for example, for the current local SIL round, we're funding Backside Open Spaces Trust to invest very heavily in a major open space there. And we made an allocation again 4 years ago. Because of the need for external funding, that hasn't gone ahead. So it's identifying what is actually deliverable, but if there are organisations it certainly as part of this funding round, we've been open for that discussion. Out of the 20 million of local SIL, which has been allocated about 5 million has gone to the voluntary sector as direct grants to voluntary organisations. So rather than saying, well, it's all going to the council departments delivering, in many cases are not the right people to deliver. So going directly to the organisation themselves or going to a local organisation who can bring something together. Encourage Gardens idea is a pilot. We've got to see if it works. Hopefully it will.
Thanks. Well, yeah, that's encouraging. I wonder if Bost could take was urging to take a Southwark-wide approach to what they do, because it's obviously very effective. We could go around circles on this. I think the one last thing I would say is just funding, distribution, still. We had a discussion internally. I think it's bonkers that it has so little link to need in the water waste application for the last SIL round. We're finding ourselves with a huge list of really important projects that need doing 1/6 of the funding, no reports. We're looking around thinking, what can we set time going? And that's what I'm trying to collectively to put right. But yeah, it had a bearing on the place space outcomes.
It does. It had a bearing in terms of our ability to put some funding into housing and upgrading playgrounds on housing estates. If that funding wasn't there in the ward, couldn't do it. We could do it in some wards, we can't in other wards. And it also comes down to the ward councillors' priorities as well, in terms of moving some of those things forward. In some wards, that wasn't the priority, they want to do something else instead. So it comes down to both local priorities, but also Councillor Pollock's exactly right. The funding is in particular wards in the borough, because that's where the development is. That's the current policy. That policy could be changed. Could be following consultation. That policy could be changed, but at the moment that's the policy.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that?
I'd just say local priority is absolutely important. It's close to the ground, understanding needs, delivering against those. That I think that these funds, when they're finite, have got to be more strategic. So I agree with you on that. And, yeah, hopefully the next round we'll see that.
Thank you. Just wanted to just revisit your first question. I think we go just on the secure by design element, which is so clearly in the report, but then the sociability element we talked about earlier isn't. I just wondered if you would like to touch on that.
My view on it is, in some ways, it's similar to legal advice. It's advice. You don't necessarily need to go with it. Secure by design is a range of advice around the best practice around community safety. It is an overriding reason in terms of community and socialisation, and that in some ways that can be judged to be a higher priority. So it really comes down to how the project comes together. It reflects a whole range of different factors, and security by design is one of those, quite an important one of those, but it's not the be all and end all. There are other things you need to consider as well, in my view.
Thank you. And sorry, since you see the question, so is there a formal role for secure by design as a element of the policy that, in the sense that that's then stronger than these other community aspects?
The formal role at the moment is one of the consultees on the planning application. Any planning application coming forward.
We talk about secure by design in policies and use the principles, but as Neil says, it's part of a suite of policies that we need to get balanced up against each other.
And does that social aspect feature in any of those other balances?
It's how you equate it, and it really comes down to what does feature is the results of consultation. So the results of consultation in developing the project, in taking the scheme through to planning, if a scheme needs planning, the consultation responses will all come out as part of that. And so it's having a really clear community view on the project moving forward. And part of that would be, well, secure by design, police advice is to do X. Actually, if the community wants to do something different, what's the reasoning behind it? And that's a in some ways a decision that planning committee can consider as part of it. It's what the project manager would be considering as part of it. A good landscape designer would be considering that as part of bringing forward a proposal.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And I guess my assumption would be that through that public consultation, we're not necessarily going to be getting lots of engagement from teenagers or young people necessarily on that.
We might do. I mean, in policy writing as well, the team go to the youth forum, but also when we go to the design review panel as well, there's not young people there, but there's a lot of people that are constantly designing schemes and listening to what young people have got. So
The other thing we have done, we work heavily with the young advisors on a range of projects, initiatives such as the Tustin, the major regeneration of Tustin estate. We had a program where training young people in being a landscape architect, and they got work experience as a result of that. So it can be done. It just comes down to what the local priorities are and what are the ways of engaging with young people in that area.
Thank you. And rather specific point, but one of the things that came out our previous report from Make Space for Girls was the prevalence of things like muggers in developments and spaces versus then spaces that are perhaps more inclusive, particularly for teenage girls, where they can feel safe, not to be enclosed, and muggers are not necessarily the answer for that group. Is the expectation that will come through those consultations, or do we have much influence over that in terms of that design?
It links to one of the things which is coming to Cabinet in January, is a social purpose of land framework, which follows on from the Land Commission a couple of years ago. And part of that is identifying 5 pilot sites where we will take a more deeper dive into the local community about the needs and priorities. And that includes some sites which may just be public realm. How do we do that better? How do we engage people better in a different way? People who don't normally get involved in tenant association or another process. So really questioning some of that. So in reality, it's those kind of things where it is very resource intensive. It involves a lot of work to get there, but it's really valuable if you can do it. And that's the next thing on the horizon in terms of taking those things forward. And there will be 5 pilot sites across the borough set out in January.
Thank you. The other link to that, I guess, the strong thing that came out of the previous report I mentioned was the need to co-design with young people on these spaces. So it feels like there's an opportunity there, particularly with that work, to make sure we're doing that.
Yes, there is, exactly. And we've done a similar thing on Peckham Square as well, in terms of bringing forward proposals for Peckham Square, which haven't yet gone into planning, but we've had a couple of youth sessions, particularly with local schools, about how do people get involved in that. Been quite a lot of work around the Oakham Road with that as well, which led to things like the bridge being done. And that came directly from one of those events. So it's again something which can be done. It's just putting that focus in as part of the project.
Understood, thank you. Theo,
You mentioned the social purpose of knowledge framework. That was started the summer of 2022. So I'm interested for your perspective on why it's taken 3.5 years to get to a framework coming to Cabinet, given this important piece of work. The second thing I want to ask about that is, have we been actively engaging with the major landowners in our borough? So Dulwich Estate, the CCGs, the Church Commissioners, PLA, Network Rail, TfL. Are they the heart of the work, and are there real projects on their land that you think are likely to follow on from the framework?
Back to talk about timescale, a report went to Cabinet last summer, I think it was, with a council response to the Land Commission as to which projects we're taking forward. One of those was the social purpose of land framework. We then went through a process with a number of land commissioners to appoint consultants to develop this framework, because nobody was really clear exactly what it was. There wasn't one in existence you could just take off a shelf. We appointed New Economics Foundation, and that's a piece of work which is now in position where it can go to Cabinet for a decision to be made to adopt it for the pilots. So it's that's where we are in terms of timescale. We are, as part of another aspect of the Land Commission report, was a Southwark Land Partnership idea of bringing together all the landowners in borough, Dulwich Estate, and others. We already talked to most of them individually anyway. I have monthly meetings with the ICB and the NHS estate people to talk about health centres. We meet regularly with a range of the other bodies, meet regularly with Dulwich Estate about particular issues. But what that will do is to bring that together formally. So another part of the report in January to Cabinet is to formally get the Southwark Land Partnership going. So we've done some terms of reference to that. There is an idea of membership of that, and to get that first meeting underway. So that's broadly where we are with it. One of the pilots you will see isn't on council land.
What's that? Is that Cheryl conversations?
I think I'll leave it until January.
Thank you. I just have one other minor question. So it just actually links back to sort of ongoing maintenance piece, and it's only because St Francis Park in my ward, it was mentioned in the report. So I know you obviously have play spaces that are developed as part of private developments but publicly accessible. That ongoing maintenance piece, I guess, is also a challenge for where we have sort of owners of those spaces who are responsible for the maintenance, and it's not always up to the standards of the local community, and we often see that sort of push and pull in terms of enforcement that needs to happen with those stakeholders. Is that part of the consideration in terms of, as we're setting up those spaces and projects, thinking about those maintenance agreements, making sure we've really got that, the mechanism to hold those private developments to account?
Yes, it is. And I think it's learning some lessons and getting that as enforceable as possible. If you look at Elephant Park, for example, it's very well maintained, not by the council. And in Lend-Lease have done a very good job with that. The people living around it do contribute towards maintenance, and that's a consequence of it not being adopted. But there are lots of lessons there which we then adopted into the Section 106 for the development now known as Pearl Yard, previously known as the Biscuit Factory, in terms of the open spaces there, about how that's all going to work. And increasingly with schemes like Council Water coming forward, with British Land being responsible for certain areas, we're learning lessons all the time about how we can enforce against that. We haven't really had major issues in terms of some of the major developments. They've actually been really well maintained, and partly because they need to sell property, so it's in their interest to maintain it, and that's what they've been able to do. There are 1 or 2 examples where there have been issues, and we've obviously tried to deal with them through enforcement.
After, I guess, some of these will be legacy issues that result in a sort of patchwork approach across the borough. So it's good to hear that we're taking the learnings forward on this. Thank you. Are there any final questions on this item? Thank you both for coming. We really appreciate your report and the presentation. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us on to the final item then, which is on the scrutiny review on play spaces. This is a report only, not a presentation or discussion on this necessarily, from Housing and Environment, Sustainability and Leisure, and it's a follow-up briefing report just on some content that we had through in one of our earlier meetings on this topic, just breaking down some of the spending and service provision across housing and environment, sustainability and leisure directorates. So we had in one of our earlier meetings a sort of comparison of how our playgrounds are maintained, what is the money that we spend on them, what team setups, what contract do we have in place, what standards are we adhering to, that's there is additional detail in that report which has been noted here, we can take into account in our review and our final report on this topic. Did members have any comments or reflections on that? No, okay, thank you. And then the final item then is just on the work programme. Click to the right page. 46 and 47. So our next meeting is on the 3rd of February. So where we've got two meetings in quick succession on the 3rd of February and the 23rd of February, which brings our scrutiny year to a close at that point. So the suggestion is for the 3rd of February meeting, there may be some particular community safety topics that we might want to deep dive into that came out of the annual strategic review by the Community Safety Partnership. So things like theft against the person, which includes things like phone snatching, like thieves, etc. And that also connects into some of the scrutiny requests that came through to us at the start of the year. There was this proposal as well to bring through an update on the Police Oversight Board, Policing Oversight Board, which was mentioned by Councillor Henning earlier, so the Trust and Confidence Plans. That board has been running for a while, and so it's just also looking at that performance of that, how that's getting on, but also the linking with a wider oversight board for London as well, and whether there are any changes that might come through as a result of that. We'd also want to look to bring through the headline report for the place-based review in February. And then there's a bit of a sort of long list of things that we might bring through in the 23rd of February meeting. So whether we may want to interview Borough Commander for police. There's the Climate Emergency Strategy and Action Plan update that is due. There were some scrutiny review requests around things like fly tipping and recycling and food recycling, which may connect in nicely with an interview with the Cabinet Member for Clean Streets and Waste. And then whether or not we want to do a sort of final report ratification at the 23rd of February meeting on the place-based review as well. Any comments on any of that or any additions? I'll cover that.
There's a lot to cover. I'm conscious, so could the place-based items be regarded as a retread or not? This question. I'm not going to die in a ditch over it, but I'd love there to be 1 hour-long session where we talk to the PLA, particularly now the super project is complete, really explore the relationship with River going forward. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's that. The timings.
Can we bring that in, or should we note that? Should we bring that in, or should we note that as work for next year? Make a recommendation for the following municipal year.
I'd like it to be this year. Sorry, that's fine.
So let's take away and look at it. So my view on the place basis review report would be that I'd be keen that we bottom that out in the first meeting, to be fair, unless there might just be a final noting in the final meeting. Julie, looking to you for objections on that?
It is usually good practice now in scrutiny is to take a sort of headline report in terms of like doing the themes and then doing the recommendations, and then doing the final write-up then should be quite easy to do because you're having an opportunity to look at the sort of themes and recommendations in some depth. So I wouldn't think it would take an awful lot of time on either session. You're probably just looking, the last session would maybe be 10 minutes. But it also, I mean, you could also do, especially if you send around the reports for circulation and then you have some time to reflect on those.
I think we could do a bunch of that outside of the meeting and then do the ratification.
Exactly.
Look at that approach.
Yeah, I don't expect it would take an awful lot of time.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll take that away. The request and see if it can be scheduled in. I'm mindful those other substantive topics. Lovely, okay, thank you. I think that takes us to any other business? No, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's all. Great, okay.